We're just beginning chapter 7. All right, so we're going to start off with something that's going to actually sound familiar, not just because we're remembering the Avodah service like we do for the other parts, but this is something we still do at the beginning of chapter 7. So hopefully this will not seem so out of place. And we're getting a couple interesting tidbits that are still very relevant to this day. So let's get down to work. Chapter 7, Mishnah 1. Looks like you have the short straw.
Yeah. He, the high priest, came to the bull and the goat that were.
That's not chapter 7.
Oh, then we have chapter 6 here, Rabbi.
No. Keep turning pages. You'll find it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Chapter 7, Mishnah 1.
Okay, sorry about that.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, we killed the bull last week.
Yeah, that's right. I was going to say. The high priest then came to read.
Guess what he's going to read? The Torah. There's Torah reading for Yom Kippur. And that's not new. They were doing Torah reading even when the temple was still there.
If he wished to read in linen garments, he reads. And if not, he reads in his own white cloak.
All right, so he has a little more flexibility here because this is not a Doraita commandment, right? It's not commanded in the Torah that he will read from the Torah because the Torah never commands us to read from the Torah for a particular holiday. But that means that he has an option. He can either wear the clothes that the Torah commanded him to wear for the other parts of the service, or he can wear what he wants. It's up to him. So this is one way to make a distinction between the Torah parts and the non-Torah commanded parts. Onward.
Can you Friday?
Gosh.
The synagogue attendant will take a Torah scroll and give it to the head of the synagogue. And the head of the synagogue gives it to the deputy high priest. And the deputy high priest gives it to the high priest.
All right, so we got the process, right? We're passing the Torah from one officiant or one official to the other.
And the high priest stands and receives it and reads. Section beginning after the death.
Also known as Acharemot. Right, and guess what's written in there? Everything that he just did.
Oh.
Right, the incense offering, the scapegoat, and all of that. So he's reading the section from the Torah that describes what the service of Yom Kippur is meant to be.
He should read this before.
Well, he did, but not on Yom Kippur day.
No,
right? I mean, he read about it in his training.
But he should read this before in Yom Kippur doing that, because this is a way to review and take awareness what is he doing and connect it with the past.
Okay,
people.
Absolutely true. But which takes priority on a day? The actual mitzvah or the description of the mitzvah?
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Doing the actual mitzvah takes priority. So he does this as soon as he can. As soon as he's done with the mitzvot, then he can go and read publicly what this is about. But you're right, we need to have context, we need to have kavanah and awareness, and the Torah reading is there, which is why it's so precious to us nowadays when we don't have the service. But he can't put off doing the Torah's own commandments, even for the Torah reading. Right? Doing the commandment is more important than actually reading about the commandment. So it's hard for sometimes to get our head around because we want the introduction, and nowadays we love being able to say we are about to do this, we are about to do this, but when they had the opportunity to do it, boom, he had to do it. It's similar reason of why we do Brit Milah first thing in the morning. Generally speaking, we don't put Brit Milah off to late afternoon if it can be avoided. Sometimes it's unavoidable for lots of different reasons, but we try to do most mitzvot that are on the day, as soon on the day.
But still, you do after Shacharit. If it's so, you are so in a rush, why not do it before Shacharit?
Because then Shacharit, which is also a mitzvah, would miss its time. Remember, there's a window of time for when you can do Kriyat HaShema and when you're supposed to do the Amidah. So if you put off Shacharit to do the Brit Milah, then you won't be able to do Shacharit at its appropriate time. Fits together like a clock.
No, also another answer.
But you want the moil to be not have his coffee and.
Like usually, first you do the mitzvot that you do more often, than the other.
It-
So
it-
Shabbat is more often than the
Certainly, yes.
So I can know that.
That as well, yes.
What time approximately do we read God during the service, Rabbi?
Nowadays,
Yeah,
we read this during the regular Torah service, which on Yom Kippur morning is usually about 10:15, 10:30.
okay.
Average. Depends how long the rabbi talks.
But on the 10th.
Right, which is another section from just a little further on, which describes more of the service for Yom Kippur, the sacrifices.
Then he would roll up the Torah scroll and put it in his bosom
Bosom.
and say, more than what I have read out before you is written. And on the 10th, which is in the book of Numbers, he recites by heart.
Oh,
So that's the same.
wait a minute, what just happened there?
He,
First of all, what's the section from the book of Numbers? What are we talking about here? And on the 10th, ...
Rosh Chodesh, no?
Just down from that. Right, so the section that is Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh that's in Parashat Pinchas is the standard maftir for all holidays. And you read the paragraph that matches whichever holiday it is. So the 10th day of the first month, that's Yom Kippur. So you read from that section of Pinchas the sacrifices that were offered. But notice how he's reading it. He's not reading it. He's doing it by memory.
By memory.
Why? Because it would take too long to roll.
Oh, because you had to roll.
To roll.
it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Roll,
wow.
roll.
Two different Torah.
Why do you think we do? Right, for
That's
this.
why they didn't do.
So in general, why do we make sure that we have two Torahs rather than roll? Because it's considered to be a tircha. It's suffering for the community to have to sit there and wait while somebody rolls the Torah all the way from Vayikra all the way till a long way into Bamidbar. The two earlier sections, you'll notice, are only like 5 chapters apart. So going from one to the next is only a few turns. The going all the way to Bamidbar would take forever. And therefore, we don't take forever. We just go ahead, or rather he would go ahead, he'd close the Torah, we're going to come back to that, hold it, and say, also, this is written, I'm going to do it by memory rather than reading it out loud because otherwise it'll take forever.
And I'm sure you have to be perfect.
Well, of course he has to be correct, and they would have corrected him, but we now, of course, have 2 Torahs. They were still concerned that the additional time needed for bringing out, setting up, taking up on Yom Kippur, when he's exhausted, when all the ceremony that's taking place is a further unnecessary delay. For us, on a Shabbat morning or for a Chag morning, sure, we have all the time in the world. Not all the time in the world, trust me. I hear about it if I go too long, but we have time. So rolling a little bit or having a second Torah is no problem, but they tried to avoid that.
So they prefer to take the risk that he will do some mistakes, receiving the memory done, taking 2 or 3 minutes to bring up a second Torah.
And if he makes a mistake, what's the problem?
You don't suppose when you read Torah, you're not supposed to do any mistakes.
So did he break the avodah, the service?
No.
Right.
But why for
So
2 or 3 minutes?
But remember,
Because
what,
you try to make as perfect as possible that day, it's a special day.
Yeah.
Or the ceremony now must be as clean as possible. Okay, in every aspect.
in every,
2 3 minutes and avoid an
what sets the aspect? What is the standard? Where do we know the standard we are supposed to be living up to? Where do we find those rules? The Torah, right? Does the Torah say we need to read the Torah on Yom Kippur? Remember, that's what we talked about for his clothes, of why he has choice there. Because the Torah doesn't say the Torah is the mitzvah, there is more flexibility for him to do it this way for the benefit of the community and for the benefit of himself, so that he is able to finish the service as appropriately as possible, rather than adding an unnecessary delay for something that is not actually a mitzvah. And we may say, why not take an extra few minutes? I wasn't out doing his job all morning. And there may be very good reasons why adding a few more minutes would have been a problem. But it's also very important, this little slice of reality here as well. You'll notice he rolls up the Torah and he holds it before he reads from Pinchas. Why? So that people don't think that what he's reading is in that part of the Torah. Right? That's something we still continue to do. When someone goes to do the bracha for an aliyah, you turn away from the Torah so that people don't think you're reading, the Baruch Hu section, the bracha in the Torah itself. Because we never want to give the impression that we have added words to the Torah. By him reminding them that this Torah is complete, the only reason I'm doing this by memory is just so we can move along. He's also reminding them that I didn't take anything out of the Torah. This Torah is a full Torah. It's just easier to do it by memory than not. And it's a very short section. It's not like it's going to take forever for him to read.
And I'm sure that they probably have like a gabbai or somebody that would write them.
If there was a mistake, then yeah, make sure. But this is the kind of thing that I'm sure he'd get right.
Yeah.
But yes, in general, we do not read by memory. We read only from the text. This is a very unique set of circumstances, and not a pattern that we use anywhere else. All right, part 5.
And he recites on it 8 benedictions for the law, for the temple service, for thanksgiving, for the forgiveness of sins, and for the temple on its own, and for Israel on its own, and for Jerusalem on its own, for the priest on their own, and for the rest of the prayer.
Okay, so if you look down in the footnotes in the handout, or I'm sure they have it in your copy as well, you'll see that these are the references to 8 different blessings. 4 of them, we have the text contained in the Gemara as well as other parts in the Amidah. 4 of them are also just perfectly unique to Yom Kippur by itself. But this is when he would say these brachot during the service. Okay, sorry, trying to turn the page. Mishnah 2.
He who sees the high priest when he reads does not see the bull and the goat that are being burned. And he that sees the bull and the goat that are being burned does not see the high priest when he reads. Not because he has not permitted, but because the distance apart was great, and both rites were performed at the same time.
Okay. So so many little things. This is one of the reasons I love studying Mishnah, because there's all these little hints of the bigger topics. So first of all, what we find out from this is they're happening at the same time, and they're happening far enough apart that there's no way to be in 2 places at once, right? If you want to be for the reading, you got to be at the reading. If you want to be for the others, for the burning, you got to be there. There's another reason this is also telling us, though, is that attending to either of these, being a spectator for either of these, you're not obligated to stay until it's done, right? You can leave in the middle of these, again, because watching them is not a commandment. It's good to be there. Obviously, the people were encouraged and the people wanted to be there. But watching the high priest read, watching the burning read, once you're there, you're not locked in. You could leave. It's just you physically can't make it. So you might as well stay where you are. Pick which one you want to watch, and that's where it is. You can't see the beginning and the end of the parade. You can't stand in 2 places at once. Make sense? Okay. Onward. 3.
If he read in the garments of linen, he will then sanctify his hands and feet, strip off his clothes, go down and immerse himself, come up and dry himself.
Right. So basically, if he has already changed into his other clothes, he would have already done this. If he had not changed into his other clothes, he does that now. And this is taking place with the ritual purification as well. Part 2.
They brought him the golden clothes. He put them on, sanctified his hands and feet, went out, offered up his own ram and the ram of the people, and 7 unblemished 1-year-old lambs. The words of Rabbi Eliezer.
That's Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. But Rabbi Akiva has a different opinion.
Rabbi Akiva said these were offered up together with the morning tummy of the morning.
That they're debating about whether he offered these additional sacrifices earlier or later. It's a big, long discussion that I don't want to get into. It's not very germane.
A lot of work there.
Yeah, like I told you, and poor Natan wants him to roll more Torahs. Part 3.
The bull for the whole burnt offering and the goat which is offered up outside were offered up together with the dusk.
So those took place at the later part of the
On the
day.
other hand, that was his only day of work for the whole year.
The only day he had to work.
No, the rest, no, the rest is usually.
He could work.
It's not like usually he didn't do anything the rest of the year.
He had no obligation to do, but he could work. Which, remember, when some of the offerings that are happening here are food, I imagine he would have also participated in them. Right? It's like you can go to the restaurant, but only if you help cook. All right, I'll help cook. Because otherwise I don't get meat, or not as much meat. So yeah, this is his one day, but we want to make sure he does everything that's required right, and so we make sure we don't overburden with things that are not required, so that way we can't say, oh, he ran out of energy because we made him do X, Y, and Z.
But it's not so bad doing an overtime one day a year. Come on.
To speak one more time in defense of the Kohen Gadol.
Okay.
It's not just a question of the physical labor. It's also a question of the spiritual burden.
And the mental.
Right. I mean, the amount of focus and stress of carrying the community's needs for this day must have been enormous. I mean, it's something that when you lead services just on a regular Shabbat, you feel the burden of the community, and it must be only a millionth of what he must have felt on that day. So there's only so long a person can hold that together and still be doing things correctly before they begin to crack. So yeah, I think we can cut him a little slack. He's not just being lazy. We remember that these are the rules not just for the generations under Herod's rulers, where the high priests were not usually very good. These were the rules for all the Kohanim, even when we had good ones. So they even the good ones still needed a little bit of limits to what we could push them to.
And during the era of Herodes, also the Kohen Gadol did all this, or they were more cutting in the border, in the corners?
According to the records we have, that they did it, yes. Well, because it was also partly their honor and prestige. So they're not going to hand off it's like carrying the Olympic torch, right? It's heavy, and you have to run, but you get the honor of carrying the torch. So I don't think they would have bowed out and let someone else take part of the glory. Part 3, I believe. No, yeah, Mishnah 4, that's where we are, yes.
He then sanctified his hands and feet, stripped off his clothes, went down and immersed himself, came up and dried himself. They brought him the white clothes. He put them on and sanctified his hands and his feet. Then he went in to bring out the ladle and the fire pan.
Right, so he's getting ready with the coals and the incense again.
Oh,
this is a lot of work and a lot of changing and a lot of mikveh dunking, right? It's making sure that that purity stays all the way through.
How many times the total for the day he's done?
I counted up on
So
it.
far, it's like 5.
I was going to say it's like 5 or 6 for the day. It's a lot.
He then sanctified his hands and feet, stripped off his clothes, went down and immersed himself, came up and dried himself. They brought him the golden clothes. He put them on, sanctified his hands and feet, and went into the burn up and dusk incense and takes care of the lamp. Right,
so now he's doing the incense not in the Holy of Holies, but in the little altar inside the Heichal, the outer chamber of the temple, and the menorah that also had to be tended to.
He sanctified his hands and feet and stripped, went down, immersed himself, came up and dried himself. They brought him his own clothes and he put them on.
Go ahead and keep reading.
And they will accompany him to his house.
So now we're at evening time.
Why did they need to accompany him to the house? Because he was so exhausted and then he can't pass away.
I think we could imagine maybe that, but it's also a kind of honor guard, that he has finished this. And as we're going to see, there's a good reason to be at his house because, read part 4a.
And he would make a day of festivity for his friends, whenever he came out of the Holy of Holies in peace.
Right.
Well, yeah, you have to celebrate the fact that you were alive.
Right. So he had a massive break fast for everybody at his house. The relief that he must have felt, the relief of the community that felt because he had done the service, that would have been an amazing moment.
What happened with all the meat from all these sacrifices?
Most of the other sacrifices were destroyed. I mean, they're
Everything was destroyed that day.
most of them, yeah. So
nobody ate any of them.
Right.
Oh, interesting.
Only for that day, everything was destroyed, or like other days?
For those types of sacrifices, yes, those were also destroyed. For other sacrifices, no, they would be eaten. So there are good charts of sacrifices of what's eaten and what's not eaten and things like that. I don't have one on me, but I've seen many good ones I use in other classes. I could look through my archive, or if you look online, you can find many people have gone through and pinpointed what happens to all the different sacrifices throughout the whole year, who eats what, which portions get burnt, and all of that. It is, yes. And it's a lot easier to read than just reading through Vayikra, which it's hard sometimes to keep track. It's the visual is helpful. Mishnah 5.
The high priest performs the service of 8 pieces of clothing, and the common priest in 4. In tunic, and breeches, a headdresses, and a sash.
So that's the regular priest wearing, and then the high priest is going to add 4 more things that are special.
The high priest adds the breastpiece, the ephod, the robe, and the front.
All right, so he has the additional pieces that he wears.
Yeah.
The frontlet, the frontlet's the thing on his forehead,
Yeah.
And then the shoulder pieces, the front, the breast piece, and sort of like turban-y thing, and then a special robe. So yeah, he's well dressed. We already said the headdress. Sorry. And then part 3.
In these were the Urim and the Thummim inquired of, but they were not inquired of except by the king, by the head of the court, or by one who the community needs. What is Urim and?
Good question. So the Urim and Thummim were stones that were kept in the fold of the breastpiece that had oracular functions. That is to say, they were used for us to understand what God wanted. Exactly how is debate. So there were those that say they were used to pass over the breastpiece, and the letters would spell out things, but we don't know for sure. But it was a very serious thing. It was a form almost of prophecy. And so that's why it wasn't used for like, what should I have for dinner tonight questions. But
I have a picture.
Oh, cool.
Of one of the suggestions of how it was used. Yeah, it's like I said, it's the Torah doesn't describe it in detail, and even the Gemara debates exactly how it happened.
The Enigma machine.
The Enigma machine, yeah, decoding. Well, because there's actually a big discussion of if the letters light up, then that's good, but how do we know what order they're supposed to be in? Right? It's like if you light up, a bunch of different letters from the names of all the tribes, that's good, but how do I organize them? And then that means you have to still have wisdom to know what to make of the message, which is a really good lesson that God can give you a message, but you need wisdom to make sense of it. And then, of course, there are missing letters. So
you can see the rabbis debate about the message for years. You change the letter. No, here means something different.
Which is why we don't rely on prophecy for deciding halakha. Right? We rely instead on debate and logic.
Could you imagine how fascinating that time period was, Rabbi? Because it was such a holy moment, and you just never knew what Hashem was going to do. And I feel like sometimes with each personality of a person, he just works differently. Like he's supposed to do differently. Am I being too Kabbalistic?
I remember when I went to Israel the first time in the Machone Marechim trip or program, I said to the guy, okay, oh, that could be great if we can create a gate in the Beit HaMikdash. And I remember his answer today. He said, no, I don't want to live in a theocracy. And that's the other side.
Right. Well, I mean, having the Beit HaMikdash doesn't mean a theocracy, right? Because the Kohanim were not in charge of the country. There was a king, or there were at least other, the Anshe Knesset Hagadol, there were other leaders of the community that were not religious leaders per se. So there was never a time when we were a pure theocracy. The only time we came close to that was actually under the Hashmoneans, who took both the high priesthood and the crown, and that was when we ended up under the Romans. So Judaism does try to steer us away from that kind of theocratic sort of governance. So it's possible to have the Beit HaMikdash without a theocracy. But you're right, a lot of people would want a theocracy if the Beit HaMikdash was back in place. They just wouldn't want the Kohanim to be in charge. They'd want themselves to be in charge. Each rabbi would want to be the chief rabbi of all the Jews in the world. And that is where the fighting would happen.
I think the Hand Rabbi also, you said that only with Hashmonai, but during the first kings, okay, Shmuel had a very strong voice there.
Of course.
So it's not like, and also Nathan. It's not like, oh no, they are separate power. The religion side, they had a lot of power over the secular, the government.
So who had more power, the prophet Nathan or King David?
The king.
Both had enormous, right? Depends, and that's the idea, right? As long as it depends, then no one person can be a tyrant. As long as the prophet can tell the king you were wrong, and as long as the king doesn't have to do what the prophet says blindly, then you actually have a proper balance of what's going on.
Yeah, but if they don't do what the king don't do what the prophet said, God punish the king. So in some way, it's okay. Do whatever I do, or
Ish, right? Punish Ish, right? Remember that was one of the promises, the very important promise that God made to David, which is the kingship will never depart from your family. Doesn't mean it will always be perfect, because only 2 generations later it's being torn in half. But there is a promise that there will be some continuity, and that is what the balance ended up being. So yes, there is a reliable succession, and there is also accountability, and it is not blind obedience, and it shouldn't also be blind rebellion. It's complicated. We never get it simple, because life is not simple. Governance is not simple. Religion is not simple. God is not simple. God may be one, but that doesn't mean God is easy. And that means we're always going to be wrestling with these ideas. And thank God. If God had made it just listen to this guy and you never have to think about a thing for yourself, we would have been in trouble. Even Moses had to deal with questions from the people, legitimate questions. What happens if we weren't ritually pure when it was time for Pesach? What happens if a guy dies and he doesn't have any boys? What happens to his inheritance? Right? Those were legitimate questions people brought to him that he had to help fill in the blanks. And that was a good thing. And even Moses himself had to help split the power by handing off the priesthood to Aaron, even as he kept the other authority in the community. So it's complicated. Good government is complicated.
But it's nice to know, like Moses obviously had that direct communication with God, so most of the times he was right. But in the occasion of for this parsha, he listened to what Aaron said, and God said, listen to it. In one aspect, I can't remember specifically what it was, but he was listening. Okay, yes, Aaron is right. So that's interesting how he was humble man.
Yeah,
so
Moses was uniquely qualified, and we don't
qualified.
Count on our leaders being Moses, because we would be very disappointed, or we would be taken advantage of. If we treated every person who was leading a Jewish community as though they were Moses, without any gentle and appropriate probing at what was being done, we would be in trouble. Only Moses could be Moses, and only Moses deserved the respect of Moses. Chapter 8, Mishnah 1. Of course, and even Moses didn't get the respect he deserved.
Chapter 8 or chapter?
Did I say chapter 5? Sorry. Chapter 8, Mishnah 1.
On Yom Kippur remaining is forbidden to eat, to drink, to wash, to anoint oneself, to put on sandals, or to have intercourse.
Okay.
That was for everybody.
For everybody, right? So finally, chapter 8 we get to the stuff that matters for us today. Right? We get a little bit of the touch of the Torah reading. Hopefully you also found a lot of the tangents were very important for philosophical and emotional or ethical reasons. But now we get to the practical Yom Kippur that we still know and love. And the thing that jumps off the page is you have to afflict your soul. What does that mean? Well, it means these things. No eating, no drinking, no washing, no anointing oneself. That's like putting on fragrant oils. Not wearing of certain types of shoes. In practical halakha, it means leather. And not having intercourse, or tashmisha tamita. The servicing of the bed is the euphemism that the rabbis used. Natan, you look like you're prepared to ask.
Yes. I was thinking, when say cohabitation, okay.
Cohabitation, yes. That's another good euphemism.
Yeah, that what happened about if it's also something sexual, but it's not directly cohabitation. For example, masturbation.
Oh, well, that's not something you're supposed to.
And the provision before.
Yes. That's not something you're supposed to be doing in general.
Yeah.
Right? Yom Kippur or Tuesday. But another question might be, what about, as we had a president once wonder, what about non-penetrative cohabitation?
Yeah.
Right? What if you're still with a partner and you're enjoying each other's company? You're not actually doing it in the vernacular. And the answer is no, you don't do that in Yom Kippur. We are going to find, however, that when it comes to the prohibitions on eating and drinking, there is not exactly wiggle room, but it's not quite as categorical as you might think. It's important to note that the Gemara argues, and the majority opinion seems to decide, that the eating and drinking prohibition is the actual Torah frontline prohibition, for which karet is the punishment, and the others are additional levels of prohibition, but not at the same punishment level. All right, which is why we're going to get the part 2.
A king or bride may wash their face, and a woman after childbirth may put on sandals. The words of Rabbi Eliezer. What would
But
okay, but the sages forbid it.
Okay, so what's the question?
So what does sandals have anything to do with childbirth?
So right after a woman has given birth, she's considered especially vulnerable, weak. No, not impure, weak. And if she's going barefoot or in inferior footwear, then she is susceptible to colds and other problems because of her weakened condition. So right after giving childbirth, we shouldn't expose her to a worse condition. And with regards to a king and a bride, how could you say they need to go around with a dirty face? Right? It's the king and it's a bride. This is important. The sages say no. Rabbi Eliezer says yes, that they can do these things. And again, you'll notice that what they're talking about doing are not eating and drinking, but the so-called lesser punishment transgressions. Guess who wins the day? Rabbi Eliezer in this case.
No way.
Yep. And this is one of the rare occasions where the sages, as a general, make a statement, but in the Gemara and in the Halakha, Rabbi Eliezer is the one who is successful.
Why? Because if the sage thought of it, and they were the teacher, meaning most of the people were learning their way. So how could Rabbi Eliezer was only one won the day? Because
in the debate in the Talmud, the majority agree with Rabbi Eliezer's interpretation. That even though this was a debate among the Tanaim, that the weight of the argument comes down on his side by the time of the Talmud. So when you have a debate among the Tanaim, sometimes there is room for siding with the minority opinion. Sometimes there isn't if there's a general rule that we don't with that particular person. Like, for example, Rabbi Meir. But this is one of the exceptions. That's why we have the Talmud, to help us navigate the Mishnah more fully. All right, now we're going to talk about one of the strangest things you're ever going to ask, which is how much eating counts as eating?
If one eats an amount the size of a large date, like it, and I see.
right? Not a pitted date, but a full date.
Okay.
We learn about that, no?
And it's a standard discussion of eating of what portions need to be eaten.
Or if he drank an amount equivalent to a mouthful, he's liable.
Right.
So he cannot eat none the size of it.
Right. If he ate less than that, however, he's not liable.
Oh, if he ate less.
Right. If he eats the size of an olive, if he takes a sip that's like just a tiny amount, he has not broken the fast. Now, how do the sages get there? Well, the way they get to this point is to say the commandment is to afflict oneself. Therefore, as long as you eat so little that your soul is still troubled, then you are not breaking the command. What does that mean? What amount is that minimum? It's this, right? So it's not you can't eat anything. It's just you can't eat enough that you would begin to feel some satisfaction from what you're eating. And therefore, these are the minimum.
Little kids didn't have to do that.
We're going to get to the kids in a minute.
Oh, okay.
So you're right on track. One of my professors in rabbinic school said that he went to an interfaith conference, one of my favorite stories. Maybe you've heard me talk about it before. And they were asking about fasts, and he was asking them the Mishnah questions. How much can you eat and still be fasting? And they're like, no, you can't eat anything. It's like, but what if you only, they said, no, you can't eat anything. It's like, all right, see, in Judaism, we argue about how much food still counts as not food. And apparently this is something unique to Judaism. Other groups, they don't talk about this. You know, this is why Jews became scientists and philosophers and doctors, because we wanted to know exactly, and lawyers, yes, and teachers. All right, go ahead and read part 2.
All foods add up to make an amount equivalent up to a date, and all the liquids add up to make a mouth. Food and drink do not add up.
Meaning with each other, right? So if you eat like half of a date size of cracker and half of a date size of beef jerky, you've eaten too much. It's not just from one food type, it's the amount of food that you're eating. And so too, if you're drinking a little orange juice and drinking a little water, but the water and the jerky, they don't add together to become too much.
But at the same time, or during the whole day?
At the same time. At the same time.
So I can take with a difference of 30 minutes a little olive.
Indeed. Yes. You would not be.
How often you could take the olive?
Okay, so you would not be liable for karet. You would not be liable for spiritual excision. You would not be breaking the biblical commandment. But if you did it knowingly, and as we're going to see, without any other reason for doing so, you would still be rebelling against the words of the sages. So you'd still be in trouble, just a different type of trouble. It's like going from a felony to a misdemeanor, which makes a big difference, but still not a goal that you should set for yourself. You know, sitting during the service, if you put like little row of foods with little timers underneath each one. Yeah.
I follow the law.
Yeah, a trail of M&Ms. I think the people in your pew would also be unhappy. Yeah. We're going to see that there is more room for extenuating circumstances than you might imagine. But I want to push on because I really want to see if we can finish this tonight.
If he ate and drank in one state of unawareness, he is not obligated to bring more than one sin offering.
Right? He forgot that it was Yom Kippur, or forgot what was going on, or that he forgot that he wasn't supposed to be eating. It's possible, right? So if you do it during one unit of forgetfulness, only one sacrifice is needed to make up for it.
But if he ate and performed labor while in one state of awareness,
which are two entirely different types of prohibitions.
Yes, he is obligated to 2 sin offerings.
Right, one for the work.
That same day, or
no, it'd be later, right? So one for doing the work and one for eating.
If he ate foods unfit for eating, or drank liquids unfit for drinking, or drank fish brine, or fish pickling the liquid, he is not liable.
Right.
Wow.
If it's not food,
because it's
not eating.
Torture.
It's not food, it's not eating. Right? So if you want to eat styrofoam on Yom Kippur, you have not broken the mitzvah. Right? You have not broken the commandment. Don't recommend it.
Yes.
Right? But if you eat something that isn't food, you haven't actually eaten, even if it's been chewed up and goes into your stomach. If you sit there and eat paper, you're still not eating, and you're going to be sick.
You can chew gum because you're not eating it.
Most authorities say that you shouldn't chew gum, but yes, provided you're not. But the issue becomes that there is part of the gum that's being released into your mouth, the flavoring, right? The sugar and other things. So it's not like sucking on a rock.
The question is how much is in proportion that the sugar comes to your body.
Well,
If it's a very small amount, it's fine.
But even it's fine for the Torah, but that doesn't mean it's fine. Go ahead and do it, and don't think that it's not a problem. Right? So that's one of the things that the rabbis do that is I always found very empowering and very spiritual, which is recognizing that God set a certain minimum standard of this is what you have to avoid doing. And the rabbi said that's good, and that's what the standard is, and we're not going to lie and say that God prohibited more, but we are going to tell you you still shouldn't do even that much. You should make sure you don't eat anything at all. Right? That additional layer, knowing that you are taking that extra step, is part of what's powerful. Whereas if you think that you're not allowed to let anything past your mouth, I can't even breathe damp air because that counts as drinking, then you're missing that extra level of, no, I am accepting this additional stringency in order to make sure that I am observing Yom Kippur in the best way, not the minimum way.
And it was pretty hot during that season, wasn't it?
On average, yeah. Yeah, on average, it's before the rainy season. The rains haven't come yet. It's still a little warm. Yeah, it's not July,
Really?
but
So
it's
a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's unlike San Diego where I grew up, where September is usually the hottest month of the year. So yeah, it was no fun. Part 4, let's talk about the kids.
Yeah. With regard to children, they do not afflict them at all on Yom Kippur.
Right, so kids are allowed to eat, kids are allowed to
Lower
drink.
than 13.
Well, keep reading.
But they train them a year or two before in order that they become accustomed to the commandments.
Right, so you start them off by saying, they have breakfast, but they don't have lunch, or they have breakfast and lunch, but they don't have dinner. And then you slowly work their way back until they can go without anything for the whole day. Because that way they get used to doing it, and they know this is expected. And then the first year, it's not going to be torture for them.
The first year meaning
when they're actually responsible at 13, exactly. So we give them a little warm-up period. Training, it's necessary. Mishnah 5.
If a pregnant woman smelled food on Yom Kippurim, they feed her until she feels restored.
All right, you got that? Woman's pregnant, and it's Yom Kippur, and she smells somebody cooking something, and she's like, I've got to have it because, there's a craving that happens. You have to feed that craving for the safety of her and the safety of the baby. So even though it's Yom Kippur, and even though it's just a craving, she is allowed to eat until she's able to control herself and her craving and not have a problem.
Oh man, that is a huge loophole. Because if you live in a city, in a nation like in Europe,
yeah,
and you are not a ghetto, you are around the common people, every other person not you are eating, you have smell. So if you are pregnant, say, oh my God, I have a craving, this.
Okay,
so you can eat all the time. So a lot of
if
people
I could ask, the word loophole has a really bad connotation.
Okay.
This is a very important extenuating circumstance. It is amazing how strict the rabbis were with the health and well-being of somebody who was pregnant, that they were willing to say that on Yom Kippur, this is more important, that we stabilize their condition than it is to force them to go without eating.
It is a room of abuse. Okay? Not a room of abuse from people.
Remember your word theocracy?
Mm-hmm.
Where is there more potential for abuse? For an individual to say, I'm hungry even though it's Yom Kippur, I need ice cream because I'm pregnant. Or for the government to say, if I don't care if you're pregnant and you think you need to eat, you don't get anything on Yom Kippur. In fact, even people in the hospitals, we're going to take out the IV lines on Yom Kippur. We're not going to allow anything to be given to anyone, mental hospitals, sick children. That's the other extreme. Right? The potential for abuse comes when you have a system that doesn't allow for any exceptions under any circumstances. And the rabbis knew that. And they were erring on the side of ensuring that we would not go down that road, as the next two pieces are also going to make clear.
The sick person is fed at the word of experts.
Right? If the doctor says that he needs to eat, he needs to eat. And notice it's not at the word of the rabbis. We don't ask the rabbi, is he sick enough that we can feed him? We ask the doctor, if he goes without food for a day, is this going to be a problem? And if the doctor says, yes, that'd be a problem, we don't say, Rabbi, is that right? We feed him. And more to that.
And if no experts are there, they feed him upon his own request until he says it.
Right.
If someone needs to take a medicine and you cannot take the medicine with an empty stomach,
right?
You need to feed them
absolutely
before the medicine.
Yeah. As long as the medicine is life important, right? It's not like vitamin pills or something like that, right? But if it's actually like, insulin or heart medicine, or to keep you from having blood clots or things like that, and the doctor says you have to have this much food in your stomach, then you eat that much food and you eat, and you take the medicine. And that's, you don't have to come to the rabbi to ask me that.
Because life comes.
We're going to get that sentence in just a few minutes. But more to the point, if you don't have a doctor around and you feel sick and you think that if you don't eat, you could pass away, even if you're a hypochondriac and, room for abuse and all of that, it's like, oh, I feel so good. Yeah. Eat, right? Who are we to judge how your body's actually working from the outside, right? If I'm an expert, okay, fine. Then I can say, yeah, he's probably okay. But if there's no one around that can tell me that, we don't ask the rabbi, we don't ask, his wife or anyone else whether or not he really needs to eat. We let him eat and make sure that he doesn't die. Because imagine the opposite. Imagine telling the person, I think you're fine, and then they die. Is that how you want to spend your Yom Kippur? All right, Mishnah 7. Right?
6.
Did I skip? Sorry, Mishnah 6, yes. I stapled this packet on the wrong side, and so I keep flipping the wrong way.
If one is seized by a ravenous hunger, they feed him even unclean things. Wow, until his eyes lit up and he returns to health.
Right, so this is like if someone is...
Because
yes. So it is a type of illness that you needed to eat in order to restore the person to health. We don't know exactly like what medical diagnosis it is now, but the rabbis consider this to be something that was life or death immediately. So if the person says, I need to eat, I'm going to die, then if the only thing you've got nearby is a dead cat, you cook them the dead cat and you feed them.
Oh, wow.
You don't wait for the guy to run to the grocery store. What's that? When it says unclean, it means literally treif. If the only thing he can eat, if the only thing that we can get to him is bacon, we feed him bacon. Until he begins to clear up, and then we stop and get something better for him to eat. But this is like
pretty clever.
Yeah, that's happening in the Holocaust.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
in the camps.
Yes.
How do you get bacon in the?
I don't think they're talking about the Kohen Gadol.
No, okay.
I think what they're talking about is the average person, not only in the days of the temple, but anywhere in Jewish communities, even if they're living in Mesopotamia or Egypt or Greece, any place. So if the only thing you've got available that's ready to go is the dead lizard you just caught, feed them the lizard until they're okay. And as we keep going on, we're going to see that this is going to be continually reinforced.
If one was bit by a mad dog, they do not feed him the lobe of its liver. Oh.
Now, why not? This was a remedy that people believed that if the dog bit you, if you killed the dog and you took out part of its liver and ate it, that it would cure you from rabies. It's not true. But all the way up into the 20th century, people were doing this kind of thing because they believed it was, a remedy. And that's what the debate was among the rabbis. Some rabbis said it could work, so go ahead and do it. And other rabbis said it's not going to help, so why would you eat it? Right? You're not allowed to eat bacon because it might cure your cancer. Right? If someone could prove that bacon cures cancer, then every rabbi in the world would say, fine, have bacon as part of your chemo treatment. But if it's a maybe going to help, and there's really no proof except, that's what the witch doctor told me, No, you don't get to do that. However,
But Rabbi Mattia ben Harash
Mhm.
permits it. So you have different.
yes,
Moreover, Rabbi Mattia ben Harash said, if one has pain in his throat, they may drop medicine into his mouth on Shabbat because there is a possibility of danger to human life, and every potential danger to human life overrides Shabbat.
right? Docheet Shabbat. It pushes off Shabbat. It supersedes it. So, in general, in the ancient world, medicine was prohibited on Shabbat because medicine wasn't really medicine. Medicine was folk cures. It's like, oh, you've got intestinal problems here. Chew on this, and like, who knows if it's actually helping or not? We actually now know that most of it didn't help. And so the rabbis were uncomfortable with people preparing the medicine because you couldn't buy like a bottle of Tylenol. If you had to eat some herb, it meant grinding the herb up and violating Shabbat. And so the rabbis said, no, we don't use these folk medicines on Shabbat. Nowadays, every rabbi that I've ever heard of says, yes, if you have an actual clinically tested medicine that we know is going to help, you are absolutely allowed to use it on Shabbat, especially since most of our medicines now, you don't have to prepare. Right? I take a pill if I need medicine. I'm not going to be grinding my own herbs. And so there's no Shabbat violation to worry about.
How about kosher? Most medicines are not certified kosher because they come in gel.
Right.
Gel.
Right. So most medicines don't need to be certified kosher because they're not food. They're inedible substances. It's like eating styrofoam. The question does become for things that you chew up that are not actually life important. So like a lot of vitamin tablets, this is where it becomes a little more, well, gummy bears, I mean, if you always have a kosher version that's different, then you take that if you can, but especially for something you're chewing up and eating. But if it's something that's probably not like life or death or even close to life or death, but just makes you feel good, then that's where it becomes more complicated. So like certain types of gel things have gelatin, because a lot of people think gelatin is going to make their knees better. And most of the gelatin, of course, is not kosher gelatin, and it really is just eating the joints, the boiled joints and cartilage of other animals. And most people say, no. If you had real proof that this was important for life and well-being, then it would be a different answer. That's why we always open for review and continued discussion. Mishnah 7.
If an avalanche fell on someone and it is doubtful whether or not he is there, or whether he's alive or dead, or whether he is an Israelite or a non-Jew, they remove the debris from above him, even on Shabbat.
Okay, so the first thing we got to get out, the elephant in the room. But no one's going to complain about anything in this passage.
They do the right thing. Well, I don't know where the avalanche will come, but I mean,
if there is doubt,
Israel.
okay, remove the doubt. So remove the doubt, right? Your idol worshiping neighbor is in his house. There's an earthquake. You see the house collapse on him. You see him through the window as the wall comes down, and it's Shabbat. Are you allowed to dig him out?
According to this, you are.
No.
No.
Because it's
According to rabbinic,
Because you already know that they're
of course
not.
you know.
If you think that maybe will be a
Right.
Jew there.
Yeah.
Exactly. If you see a shopping district collapse and Jews use that district, non-Jews use that shopping district, then you can dig and dig and dig and dig and dig until you find everybody you can. But if you see somebody that you know, it's an idolater, the house collapsed, and you know they're probably trapped. Maybe they're alive, maybe they're dead, but they're definitely trapped. According to the rabbinic law of their day, on Shabbat, you were not allowed to dig the non-Jewish person out because you're violating Shabbat for somebody who is part of a culture and community that is trying to kill you. And that reflected the reality that our ancestors faced. Now, modern generation, most authorities will tell you, you dig them out, even if you're sure they're not Jewish, because the non-Jews who surround most of us nowadays are not idolaters who are trying to kill us. And therefore, rescuing them at the violation of Shabbat is not a problem. But if there was doubt, then yes, we definitely dig them out, no matter what the doubt is.
In which tractate we saw the same similar case about a pregnant woman that the life is at risk.
Mhm.
That if it's an idolater woman, we say we write no, don't help her.
I think that was in Avodah Zarah.
That's
Yeah, we talked about a lot of these uncomfortable realities that are.
That's why I thought.
Yeah.
I thought okay, all this sounds so familiar. I know that we saw this in a different chapter.
Right.
It was Avodah Zarah.
Yes.
Correct.
All right, and then part 2 is going to get even more difficult.
If they find him alive, they remove the debris. But if they should,
But if he's dead, sorry.
but if dead, they should leave him there until Shabbat is over. Oh, that's very difficult. Yeah.
Right, and this is not Jewish versus non-Jewish. This is
All of it.
right. So you're digging and you remove half the blocks, and you see that the person's alive. You remove the other half, even though it's on Shabbat. On the other hand, you're digging, you remove half the blocks, and you see the person's dead. You don't unbury the rest of the body, because now Shabbat goes back into effect, and you're not allowed to keep digging on Shabbat. And so you have to wait until Shabbat is over, and then you unbury the person, or unbury them from the avalanche, so that you can prepare them for burial, and when they will die. Now, the only place that there's an exception for this is if the building's on fire. You are allowed to move a dead person out of the fire to prevent the body from being burnt up. But otherwise, you have to leave. I mean, leave it there. It doesn't mean you have to walk away. You shouldn't just like walk off and let the dogs come. It's you stay, but you're not allowed to keep unburied.
You know, Roy, I don't know that today, because I remember in Israel when I lived there in the Second Intifada, there were terrorist attacks on Shabbat, blow people, and Kibbutz Kadisha, they came also in Shabbat to clean the park. They didn't leave there the body.
Right.
They cleaned it.
So my guess is that they were worried that if they left, because this is not an avalanche where it's a clean body just under rocks, if they left it, how would they ever find the pieces? Right? I mean, like I said, dogs, rats, birds. I mean, it's such a nightmare to even to think about these things, but they didn't have the option of waiting until after Shabbat to collect the body. If they collect it now, or they never collect it, or not all of it. It's just nightmare that to be forced with. Yeah, we were doing a discussion with our religious school on ethical dilemmas of the Shoah, because with tonight and tomorrow being Yom HaShoah, and it's just so hard trying to have that conversation. But they did really well of coming through a very, very mature discussion. But you should never be faced with having to handle those kinds of circumstances.
Are you going to be at the JCC event? Is it tomorrow?
I'm not sure yet because of the conversion class and everything. And we've already missed like 3 weeks because of the holiday.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure we're going to be on schedule. All right, last Mishnah.
All right, we made it.
We're like I said, I know we're over time. We started late, however. So
Well, 2 more, 8 and 9.
Oh, right, 8 and 9. Yeah, but we can get through these. These are only major topics. Maybe we'll save the extra the new chapter 4 for next week for the kashrut. But we'll finish up. We'll finish up the Mishnah.
We'll talk about it later.
Okay.
The sin offering and the certain guilt offering affect atonement. You want me to read the whole thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Death and Yom HaKippurim affect atonement together with repentance. Repentance affects atonement for like transgression of positive commandments and the negative commandments. And for a severer transgressions,
Severer
transgressions, repentance suspends the divine punishment until Yom HaKippurim arrives and affects atonement.
Okay. So it's a little complicated.
Yeah.
But what we're basically talking about here is the question of teshuvah. Right? What does teshuvah do? And in order to understand that, we have to sort of figure out what happens when you commit a transgression. So we're going to do a little timeline here. There's my arrow. I'll switch colors so we can see the different points. I sin. Right? As soon as I sin,
You need to find the cosine.
I'm not doing trigonometry. Right? As soon as you sin, your punishment is ready. right? It's like you sin, you should be punished. But God doesn't punish immediately, right? God gives time for us to do tshuva, for us to repent. Then the question is, when I have done tshuva, I'm just going to write a T for tshuva, what happens to the punishment? Well, for certain lesser types of transgressions, once I do that, boom, we're done. For other types of transgressions that are greater, it is still possible that I should be punished until Yom Kippur comes and finishes the problem completely. Right? So if I commit a small transgression and I do tshuva, boom, everything is wiped away immediately. If I commit a big transgression and do tshuva, boom, everything is suspended, right? God hits the pause button. We wait until Yom Kippur, and on Yom Kippur, we hit cancel. Right?
I know that.
Go for it.
I know that I heard the explanation.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, still, it's terrible when, for example, someone died in Yom Kippur or one day before, after. It's like, oh yeah, that's your punishment, okay? And so that person did something so terrible that really, literally, was the day of the judge him. Okay.
So then we get to, and I think this is just a second. So we'll go into, so for some, there is also the issue of death and or suffering. And for some, it goes all the way through these portions for the worst of the worst of the worst. However, you can't read backwards. Right? You can only read the chart this way. What I mean is, and this is the problem in the book of Job, which I actually had the opportunity to talk about a little bit this morning too, is if I see somebody die on Yom Kippur, I can't work backwards to know that they sinned, and that's what brought their death on that day. But some people die because they get hit by a car. Some people die because they're sick with cancer. Some people die because they commit suicide. Right? There's lots of ways that a person dies. Some deaths are indeed arranged as the final step of the tshuva. We don't get to know which is which. And just because something is close to Yom Kippur, we should not feel more certain that we know which is which. There's a very famous story about a cholera epidemic that was happening in a Jewish community leading up to Yom Kippur. And on Yom Kippur itself, people were dying. And they were like dragging them out of the shul while Yom Kippur is happening. And the rabbi of the community had to force everybody to eat to keep up their strength to be able to survive until the epidemic was broken. Nowhere in that story does the rabbi get up and say, now, Joe and Fred, who died today, they clearly were the worst sinners in our community because they died on Yom Kippur. No, they don't. Because we don't know why Fred and George and whoever died on that particular day.
Yeah, but still, it's a terrible feeling. I'm very.
But who made the feeling?
If coming to me, I would feel terrible.
But whom?
Well, I will not leave this world, by the way.
The person who told you that dying near Yom Kippur was somehow a punishment for a great sin is the person who introduced this idea. Right? They're the ones who made it so that we think we can read God's plan backwards and know the sin of someone else. You don't know that. God knows that. The person may know that. They may or may not know it, but probably they do, if it's a big enough sin that this is actually coming down as the final punishment. But we don't. You know, we have that whole book of Job in all of its multiple chapters of beautiful and difficult poetry to try and tell us, don't be like his friends. Because they see him with his kids dead, his wife dead, his body afflicted, and all of his wealth gone, and they show up and say, well, you must have deserved it. All you have to do is admit what you did was wrong, and then things will get better. And we, the reader, we know he did nothing wrong. That's why the book is written the way it's written. So that we can say, Job's right. Job is a good guy. And he's being treated unfairly if we're going to look at the world through our eyes. But his friends, they thought it was perfectly fair. And so they went to him and said, well, you know, righteous people don't suffer. You're suffering. You must not be righteous. And God shows up at the end of the book and says, get out of here. You don't talk to my friend Job like that. What do you know of right and wrong? Job is worth all of you put together. Now, Mr. Job, who's complaining, you also don't understand. Which is why we're left at the end saying, all of this is fuzzy.
Oh, yeah.
Right? From our point of view. What we should know is that when we've committed a transgression, we should do tshuva. And we should know that when we do tshuva, for some of the major transgressions, we won't be completely in the clear until Yom Kippur has come to make atonement. That day when God really makes everything all better again. And for some things, yes, death will be the final release from the consequences of our behavior. But what this is actually teaching is not be afraid of what is coming or be afraid of the hammer of God's judgment, but that after all of this is done, if you did tshuva, we're all good. Right? If I murdered someone, but I really do tshuva, when I get executed by the court, like we talked about in Sanhedrin, when I die, I am cleansed of my crime. Right? My punishment is my final release from my guilt. And I'm not punished again by God for what I did, if I did tshuva and accepted that my punishment was indeed the correct punishment for my crime. This is all about releasing us from guilt, not about making us feel worse. And it, if you can't tell, it bugs me that a lot of people continue to perpetuate superstitions or phrases or teachings that make people who are going through the hardest moments in their life feel even worse about something. It's like when people say, well, you know, if you had a car crash and your baby got killed, did you check the mezuzah on the nursery? How is that helping someone? Right? They're going to go and check the mezuzah and it's fine. So now what will they blame? Right? Did they put the tefillin on wrong that morning? Did somebody sneak non-kosher food into the baby food? I mean, they're going to look for something else to blame, some sin they did that caused their child to die, rather than whatever caused the accident to happen. Or the mezuzah was faulty. Oh, good. Now they get to live the rest of their life believing that because they had a bad mezuzah, their baby died. You have brought peace to the world, Mr. Helpful Suggestion. Right? And nowhere does it say in the Torah that if you have a bad mezuzah, your baby will die. You think God might have written that in big letters if that was what God was going to teach us. No, what God does say is, if you've done something wrong, I will forgive you. And this is the way it works. That is written in nice big letters. And yet people focus on the minutia, because the more you can think of this as a game, the more you think of this as a machine, the more you think you can win. Right? It's like those self-help books of how to win at blackjack, how to win at slot machines, how to win at poker, because everyone thinks that somehow they're going to be able to get the magic formula, hit the jackpot, and now they don't actually have to what? Worry about living a good life?
Yeah, we're doing teshuvah.
We're doing tshuva if you did something wrong. I mean, it's very frustrating.
It just reminds me, when you're talking about this, it reminds me of the Israelites when we were going through the process of learning who God is personally.
Right.
You know, you're going through all those years in the desert. The more you read it, the more you realize, that we're going from level to level. One thing is knowing about God as a,
right.
Of your forefathers, and another thing is to know Him personally. When you experience Him, when you saw the fire, when you saw all these experiences, it tends to become more personal, and then you realize, all these superstitions, you realize it's all about you and Him and that relationship. And that, things might go wrong, situations might be wrong, but that doesn't mean that you're altogether wrong. It's just, it's just a process of learning
exactly
about
right.
you and Him.
And continuing to refine and remembering every single day, you don't know God's mind.
Yeah.
we know what we can, and we work together to take from the Torah, to take from the oral law, and get closer and closer and closer. But we have to make sure that we still have the humility to say, you know what, I don't know why this happened, and I'm really upset about it. And again, as we are now sort of officially in Yom HaShoah, all the more so on this day, we have to look at great tragedies and great problems and say, I don't know why this happened, but I don't believe it was a punishment from God. Because if it were, God would have had to have warned us. God would have had to have told us. You know, when the temple was going to be destroyed, he gave us a few hundred years worth of, warnings. That was a really long alarm bell. And we kept hitting snooze. And so we sort of understand that what eventually happened. We didn't get the alarm bells in the show. There was no Navi, there was no prophet who came and told us this is what's about to happen. And instead, there were very evil people who said this is what we want to do. And it was so evil, we didn't even believe that they were serious. It's like, it's lunacy. How could that ever possibly happen? And that, on both the mini scale as well as the macro scale, is one of the lessons we have to remember, is that we don't really know why it happened. And it's more fun to act like we know, because it gives us a feeling of control and of certainty. But really, we have to learn to live with a certain amount of uncertainty, of doubt, and find our path as best we can, using the law and teaching of our people to make sure that we are going the best way we can, even though we're not 100% sure. Right? I may not be sure of exactly which direction to go, but I know it's not that way. Right? Because the Torah and the oral law have focused me this way. And the more I study, the more I can get closer to true north. But I'm never going to be 100% sure I'm on true north. I got to still check. What do you think? Is that what this means? Is that what this means? What do you do? What was your rabbi's teaching? What did Rambam say? What did Shulchan Aruch? That's helping us stay on track and not continually veering off.
And it's just like you were teaching us. You have to have those people around you that help you focus.
Yep.
You know, all these different people, that knowledge and understanding. That growth has to happen to.
None of us can do it alone. None of us can do it alone. All right. On that, we're just going to hit Mishnah 9, because I really do need to finish and then pick up my son. So no, we have one more Mishnah. I need you to keep reading, because I'm not going to leave this for next week.
One who says, I shall sin and repent, they do not afford him the opportunity to repent.
Right? So, speaking of loopholes, you may think the whole teshuva system is like great. I mean, man, I can sin, go to Vegas for the weekend, come back Monday morning, go, al-chet, I did sins, Hashem knew, Hashem. And I'm good, right? Because this is my get out of jail free card. And what the Mishnah is saying is, no. Tshuva means a definite commitment, even if we trip, but a definite commitment not to do it again. You don't premeditate your next sin while repenting currently. That's not repentance. Right? Repentance means you truly regret your behavior and you have no intention to do it again. Even if you fail and do it again, that's better than saying, I won't do it again, God. So no, it doesn't work like that. Right? And you'll also find your legs will be cut out from under you. You'll think, I'm going to go to Vegas and I'm going to live it up. And then Monday morning, I'll go to Minyan and I'll say, and I'll be good. And you don't make it back from Vegas, right? You do some wild thing, and that's the end. You're a casualty of Sin City. Guess what? You didn't get the chance to do tshuva. And now you're going to have to reckon in front of the judge without the benefit of having done tshuva. So don't count on this system. This is not a loophole.
Don't do it next time.
And part A is similar.
If one says, I shall sin and Yom HaKippurim will atone for me, Yom HaKippurim does not affect atonement.
Right? So if you think Yom HaKippurim is this magic day that God waves his big magic wand and the fairy dust of atonement sprinkles down from heaven and you don't have to do anything except, just wait for it to happen. No. Tshuva plus Yom Kippur works. Yom Kippur by itself, nothing. Right? It's just a day if you don't make it more. Yeah. Part 2.
For transgressions between men and God, Yom HaKippurim affects atonement. For transgressions between men and his fellow Yom HaKippurim does not affect atonement. until he has pacified his fellow.
Right? So if I am insulting and rude to Yerach, and then I feel really bad about it, and I come here on Yom Kippur and I say, oh God, I can't believe how badly I treated Yerach. That was terrible of me. He was such a nice guy, and I was rude and insulting. I've done nothing. I have to go to Yerach and say, Yerach, I'm sorry that I treated you so badly. What I did was wrong. Please forgive me. And then, of course, being such a nice guy, he will forgive me. There is a maximum number of times I have to go as long as I'm being sincere. And then I'm okay. Right? So this is a major facet of Jewish law, because I remember I had a conversation with a missionary once in a shopping center who was trying to, convert me to their faith. And they were saying, you need God to save you from your sins. And I said, well, God's already given me a way to, save me from my sins. It's called Yom Kippur. And I know that if I've done something wrong between myself and God, I can do tshuva, and then I can, be clear and have Yom Kippur to finalize that search. And if I've done something wrong to another person, I can go to them and fix it. And then Yom Kippur will take care. And he says, but what if the other person doesn't want to forgive you? And I said, well, that will make me more careful next time, won't it? And he looked terrified.
Really?
He is like, but, it's like, but and he couldn't handle the idea that you would have to go to the person you had wronged and ask for forgiveness. It's much easier to ask God for forgiveness than it is to ask someone else, like a real person standing in front of you. But if you don't ask that person for forgiveness, then you haven't actually repaired the damage you did. And one of the main things we learn about doing tshuva is if you don't fix the damage you did, you're not doing tshuva. Oh, I'm really sorry, I stole $1 million from all those orphans. But do you like my new boat? No, give the money back to the orphans and then say you're sorry. Don't spend it and say you're sorry. And then the same with dealings with other people. All right, onward.
This was expounded by Rabbi Elazar.
Elazar, but
Elazar.
Ben Azariah.
From all sins before the Lord, you shall be clean. For transgressions between man and God, Yom HaKippurim affects atonement. But for transgression between man and his fellow, Yom HaKippurim does not affect atonement until he has pacified his fellow.
So a great example of halachic midrash: for all sins before the Lord, you will be clean, not before Frank. Right? Before Frank, you have to go stand in front of Frank. You sin before Frank, Frank is going to need to be a part of this conversation. It can't just be you and God, it's you, God, and Frank. And that is built into the text.
As a matter of fact, I had this conversation with my coworkers because one of them actually sent out an email for Yom Kippur saying, well, I asked for forgiveness from anyone that I have offended. And so one of the girls came up to me and says, how come we haven't got an email from you? And I said, because if I have offended you, I have to go personally to you and ask for forgiveness. And she couldn't believe it.
It's definitely perfect. Now, if you say, I have approached everybody that I think I might have offended, and I want to send out a general email saying, if I'm trying to make amends, and in case I've forgotten about something I've done, if you could let me know, I would like to come and apologize. That's okay. That's okay. But yeah, just to say a blanket, sorry, everyone,
Yes, exactly.
That you're not actually remembering what you did. You're not focusing. You're not actually getting.
Or changing that behavior.
Yeah.
Which is the ultimate.
Yeah. It's like, we cool? Everybody, we're cool? Okay, great. No, I don't think that you really got the point. All right.
How my wife said, you need to start a few months before, okay, starting
To have enough time.
I think sorry for everything we did.
Yeah. You have a long list.
Yeah.
All right. And then very famous from Rabbi Akiva, another midrashic insight.
Rabbi Akiva said, happy are you, Israel, who is it before whom you become pure? And who is it that purifies you? Your Father who is in heaven. As it is said, and I will sprinkle clean water upon you, and you shall be clean.
Right? So we know that God is the one who is forgiving our sins. God is the one who cleanses us. We don't need anybody else.
And it further says, O Ho, mikveh of Israel, O Lord, just as a mikveh purifies the clean, so too does the Holy One. Blessed be he, purify Israel.
Right? So mikveh, meaning hope, is being used as a play on words for mikveh, meaning the ritual bath. So God is our hope, and God is also our mikvah. He is also the source of our ritual restoration. So that is Yoma.
Yeah, that's
That is
a
Yom
beautiful way to
Kippur. Any last questions before we move on? Yes.
Why did they choose Rabbi Akiva this side to close the Masechet?
What do you think?
I don't know. You are
I have my opinion, but do you have any interpretations of the text of why this is very fitting to finish off?
Because this, what Rabbi Akiva says, kind of summary of everything what we saw during the Old Masechet.
Good. When did he live?
After the destruction of the temple.
Right. So his statement is even more powerful. It's a beautiful summary of everything, which is that God is our hope and God is the source of our restoration. But he's also saying that at a time when he has only ever seen the temple in ruins. And yet he can still say that. And he still knows that Yom Kippur works. He still knows that the forgiveness of sin still happens, even though we don't have the goat for Azazel, and even though we don't have the Ketoret on the incense on the altar, even though we lack the Aron HaKodesh and the Holy of Holies, this still works.
Do you think that still will say the same after the consequence of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, that he was one of the leaders that destroyed the people, destroyed the land?
What were his last words? Right. Right up until the very end, he was still trying to teach through his prison bars, and he was still saying the Shema as they tore his skin apart. Right. So of course he still believed it. He believed the Romans were horrible, but that doesn't mean that God was not still God. God was echad. God is not changing. Right. The God who was there at Moses is the same God there in creation, and the same God who is at the end of time. And right here too in the meantime. Yes. So Rabbi Akiva understood that. And I think he would have been happier without the failure of the rebellion, without the repression of the Romans and all of that. But I don't think it changes his opinion of God or his opinion of Tshuva and Yom Kippur. So it's a good question and a very fitting end indeed. All right, let me hit off.
So next one, which one? Rosh Hashanah.